So hello everyone and welcome to part 8 of our series in conversational Japanese. Now in this part I would like to digress off from our review of the Japanese alphabet and go over the next in the series of Japanese greetings, and that would be good afternoon, which in Japanese is konnichiwa. So you may have figured out that in Japanese there is a separate greeting for good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And so in this video we will be covering the greeting for good afternoon. Now many times many foreign speakers will pronounce this konnichiwa, which is a mispronunciation of the phrase. And so what we will do, like in previous videos, is to deconstruct this phrase so that we understand the proper pronunciation of this greeting. Okay, so the best way to learn the proper pronunciation of this greeting is to separate it into the 3 basic syllables. That way, when you combine them, it'll make it easier to understand the combination. So if you look at the 3 separate syllables, they will be kon, nichi, and wa. So let's take a look at the first syllable, kon. And that's constructed using the 2 Japanese letters ko and un. Now, if you recall, ko is the last letter in the second column of the Japanese alphabet, kakikuke ko, which we covered in part 3 of the conversational Japanese series. So if you don't remember, it might be good to refresh yourself by looking at that video one more time. Anyway, when you combine that letter with the letter un, then what you get is kon. Now what's interesting is kon, if you drop the hard K, will give you on. And on is a standard sound that you often hear in the Japanese language. And in fact, it's what they would use when they use their Japanglish to pronounce the English word on. And the reason that becomes on is because on is spelled O-N. And when you take a look at the O, the corresponding Japanese letter to that will be the letter O. And if you take a look at the N, it will be the letter un, which you see as the second letter in the syllable kon here. And so if you put it together, you get on. So the way the Japanese would pronounce the English word on is often on that you hear in Japanglish. Now what's interesting is there was a very popular TV show, a children's TV action hero show back in the old days called the Artificial Humanoid Hikaida in Japan, which in Japan was pronounced Jinzo Ningen Hikaida. And why I bring this up is the main character during that transformation or morphin time would say the phrase switch on because he wanted to switch his android robot powers on. But of course, since he used Japanglish rather than English, instead of switch on, he would say switchy on. Okay, I'm starting to digress too much. But anyway, on is a typical sound that you might hear in Japan, and so if you put the hard K on, you get a very distinct kon sound. It's not kon as in an ice cream cone, and it's also not kun that you often hear people mispronounce this phrase as konnichiwa. It's a very distinct kon. Okay, so the next syllable we have is pronounced nichi. And it uses the letters ni and chi. So if you combine it together, you get nichi, or faster, nichi. And what's interesting is this syllable is the Japanese word for day. Now there are other words for it, but this is one of them. And what's interesting is I know many of you are familiar with the phrase ichiban, which means number 1, and as the Japanese would pronounce it, ichiban. But if you drop the bum part and just leave ichi, which is the Japanese word for 1, not itchy as if you were bitten by a mosquito, but ichi, and you combine ichi with this nichi, then you get the Japanese word for 1 day, which is ichinichi. So again, I'm starting to digress again, but for example, if the Japanese were to say this work will take 1 day, then they would say kono shigoto wa ichinichi kakaru. So again, that is a little bit of a trivia for where this syllable will come from. And what's interesting is good evening is almost similar to good afternoon, except this syllable is changed from day to night. but we'll leave that for another video. Okay, so the last syllable in the phrase good afternoon is pronounced wa. And at this point, I do need to denote an anomaly here. The Japanese letter that's used for it is the letter ha and not the letter wa. But in Japanese, sometimes the ha is pronounced wa depending upon which phrase that, or word that you put it into. Now, an interesting example of this comes out in the famous Japanese anime and comic series Naruto, where if you are a fan of Naruto's anime or comic series, you know that his arch rival is a young gentleman named Sasuke. And Sasuke is actually a standard Japanese ninja generic name. It's actually named after a famous literary ninja figure named Sarutobi Sasuke, or Sasuke Sarutobi, which of course, if you know the comic Naruto, the comic author took that name and split it and gave the Sarutobi part to one of the teachers in the Hidden Leaf Village. And of course, Sasuke got the name Sasuke. And instead of Sarutobi, he got the last name Uchiha. But it actually isn't pronounced Uchiha, and if you look at the family symbol that he has in the back of his clothing, which kind of looks like a ping pong paddle, it's actually the symbol of a fan that the Japanese would use to cool themselves when they're walking outside. And those fans are called Uchiwa in Japanese, but they're spelled with the letter ha instead of wa, so although it's pronounced Uchiwa, it's spelled Uchiha. And so I guess when somebody did the translation into English, they literally took the ha part and made the ha pronunciation. So in the English version of Naruto, his name is Sasuke Uchiha, not Sasuke Uchiwa. But in Japanese, it will be Uchiwa Sasuke. So anyway, I'm digressing one more time, but I thought you would find that interesting. And returning to topic, the last syllable is pronounced wa. Okay, so now that we know the pronunciation of the individual syllables, it's relatively straightforward to pronounce the actual phrase of good afternoon. So that would be to put all three syllables together distinctly, and you will get konnichiwa, konnichiwa, konnichiwa. And so that's how you would pronounce it in Japanese. Not konnichiwa, but konnichiwa. Okay, so this is a relatively formal way of doing the pronunciation. You can do it a little bit more informal, and just like with good morning, where you took the ohayo and lengthened the yo part so that you went ohayo, you could do that also with konnichiwa, where you would take the wa part and lengthen it. So you could say konnichiwa, and that would be another way of saying it. But that would be a little bit more informal. If you were, for example, going to a job interview in Japan and you come in and greet them for the first time, I would rather go with a konnichiwa. Okay, so one last thing is, although this is the word for good afternoon, this is also the generic word for hello. So if you were to use any one of the three phrases, we'll go over konbanwa or good evening later on, but if you were to go over any of these three phrases and use it as a generic phrase for hello, it would be this phrase. So, konnichiwa can be used for hello, although if you were a foreigner and you went to Japan and you used it in the morning or the evening, they may turn around and think that you didn't understand that this is good afternoon and say no, you would say ohayo or konbanwa for the other times. But amongst themselves, they would use this as the phrase for hello, and they would say konnichiwa. So you might get a correction, but understand that this can be the phrase that you generically use for hello as well. Okay, so that concludes this particular video. I hope it didn't drag on too long. I apologize for the digressions. We'll continue to go on in the alphabet for the next few videos, and then I'll try to go over the next greeting. I hope you continue to join us in our quest for conversational Japanese, and thank you very much for watching the videos. If you have any comments, as always, please post them in the comment section below. It's always a pleasure to make these videos for you, and until the next time, as always, Jaya, nice day everyone. literary